whom we are really honored to have amongst us. Professor Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya, Professor, Department of English and Cultural Studies, University of Bardhaman. And we have Srimati Bulu Mukhopadhyay, Associate Professor, Department of English, New Alipur College. Just at the outset, I would like to share one thing, that yesterday one of our departmental colleagues, she lost her father to COVID, and we were really very shaken. And at the beginning, I would offer my deep condolence to Afrin Hayat and hope that she and her family are able to cope with the crisis. But the department, once again, we, and including Afrin, we thought that we need to show a bit of determination and grit, that whatever happens, we need to be together to keep our spirits and minds together, think of something which can remind us that fights and struggles have always been a part of our lives. And nothing better, I think, than today's topic, Lekhoni Korite Ichchuk. So we will be having two very well-known speakers who would be addressing us, and I won't be taking much time, but just at the outset, I would like to share with you that when we were thinking of the webinar title, we were reminded of কৈলাসবাসিনী দেবী's preface to Hindu অবলাকুলের বিদ্যাভ্যাস, যেখানে উনি বলছেন যে বামা সুন্দরীর ব্যাপারে, যে তাহার অনুকম্পা প্রাপ্ত না হইলে আমরা এই হাড়ি বিড়ি ধরা হাত কখনোই লেখনি করিতে ইচ্ছুক হইতো না. And I think this is something which we can set against another very important treatise on women's education, Bharatborshiyo Strigoner Bidya Shiksha by Tarashankar Torkoratna, where he was exhorting our women to emulate the Western writers, where he's saying, Jodi Gauriyo Shimontini, England, Kamini, Edgeworth, Somerville, Hannah More, Landon, Hemans, Shelley, ইহাদিকে তুল্য বিখ্যাত গ্রন্থকারিণী হইতে পারে, তবে ইহা অপেক্ষা আমরা আর কি সৌভাগ্যের প্রত্যাশা করি. So today we will be focusing on Begum Ruqayya and Jyotirmoyi Devi, and we have amongst us Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya, Professor, Department of English and Cultural Studies. And when I asked for a ritualistic barnote, I knew Nandini would smile at me, because we all have been reading her works. We have been so much enriched listening to her, but still I would like to add that she has been invited as Professor and HOD of English and Culture Studies and Dean School of Languages to the Central University of Jammu. She is the chairperson of SPARSH, the Committee for Women's Rights, and she is the UGC National Award winner in the Postdoc Research Fellowship. The list goes on. And we are reminded of her books on R.K. Narayan's The Guide, on Salman Rushdie's novels, on Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable, Sharad Chandra Chattopadhyay's novels, on Rabindranath's Kora. We have repeatedly referred to her articles like In Search of Swaraj, a Gandhian reading, Till One Greater Man Restore Us. So I'm just giving a very random, I think, list from my memory, because we know how infinitely rich and prolific she has been. And particularly the one which comes to my mind is A City Visible but Unseen. So Nandini, we are really very honored to have you amongst us. And we'll also have another very interesting address by Bulu Mukhopadhyay, Buludi of the Associate Professor, Department of English, New Alipur College, who will be talking about Jyotirmoyi Devi. Professor Bulu Mukhopadhyay postgraduated in English from University of Calcutta. She did her MPhil from Jadavpur University. Apart from teaching English literature, she also keeps herself busy in translating texts. She has translated Shukumar Rai's Pagladashu and also short stories which have been published from Shahitya Academy, Kolkata. Her interest is in gender studies and children's literature. And she is fond of cooking and travels and interested, as she says, in small things of life. And another very important thing about her address is that the passages that she will be referring to in her address from Jyotirmoyi Devi's work has been translated by her. So we would now request our principal ma'am, if she is there, to deliver the inaugural address. She was on some call because there is also a COVID related problem in her family. Maybe she's caught up because of that reason, but still we'll just wait for a few more seconds and then I think she will obviously want the program to go on. হ্যাঁ ম্যাম, আপনি কি আছেন? হ্যাঁ, লিঙ্ক তো আপনাকে সব পাঠিয়ে দিয়েছি, আপনি ওখানে ক্লিক করুন, আপনার হোয়াটসঅ্যাপে দেখুন, আমরা আপনার অ্যাড্রেস প্রিন্সিপাল ম্যাম জয়েন করে গেছেন না। ম্যাম আপনি শুনতে পাচ্ছেন?
হ্যাঁ, শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
হ্যাঁ, আমরা সবাই we have our principal, Dr. Satya Upadhyay, who is now been able to join. Ma'am, could you please deliver your welcome address so that we can go ahead? প্রিন্সিপাল ম্যাম আপনি কি আছেন? হ্যাঁ ম্যাম, আপনি কানেক্ট হয়ে গেছে, আপনি বলুন।
ঠিক, তোমরা শুরু করো।
অ্যাড্রেসের জন্য অপেক্ষা করছি।
সুপর্ণা?
হ্যাঁ বলছি, আপনার অ্যাড্রেসের জন্য অপেক্ষা করছি।
না, তোমরা স্টার্ট করে দিয়েছো?
হ্যাঁ, আমরা জাস্ট একটা ঘোষণা হয়েছে, আপনার ওয়েলকাম অ্যাড্রেসটা এবার। আপনার ওয়েলকাম অ্যাড্রেস হলে তারপর বাকি প্রোগ্রাম হবে।
ওকে, সবাইকে নমস্কার। Good morning to everyone. It takes a lot of grit and courage to host a webinar when the raging pandemic threatens our survival, and it is only at such moment that we need to tell ourselves we have braved so many kinds of storms to reach a new dawn. Today's webinar, Lekhini Korite Ichchuk, Retracing Women's Writing in Colonial Bengal, organized by our Department of English in association with IQAC, opens up a significant space within the feminist recovery of women's writing and also on women as readers and interpreters. I am happy to welcome the renowned scholar, Professor Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya, Professor, Department of English and Cultural Studies, Director, UGC SAP DRS, to present the University of Bardhaman, and I look forward to her address on Rukaiya. I extend my heartiest welcome to you, madam. You are welcome here. I extend a warm welcome to Srimati Bulu Mukhopadhyay, Associate Professor and Head Department of English, New Alipur College, who will be speaking on Jyotirmai Devi. I am looking forward to an immensely interesting session. You are welcome here, madam. I was particularly intrigued by a degree of fluidity characterizing the two writers in terms of territorial space, languages, and culture. Begum Rukaiya was born in Bangladesh, lived her wedding life at Bhagalpur, and then, after the death of her husband, she settled in Kolkata. Jyotirmai Devi was born in Jaipur, spent 15 years as wife at Hooghly in Bengal, returned the death of her husband, and then settled in Kolkata. She wrote about Rajasthan, the condition of women in her collection, Aravalli Arale. अरावली एक पर्वत है, अरावली पर्वत के आड़ाले माने उसके पीछे, which was published in Basumati and Bharat Barsha. The stories and her poems critiquing the mythicization of women like Ahilya or Radical, and so empowering for her contemporary readers and also to us. Both these writers wrote in their mother tongue and also had knowledge of other regional languages, including English, the then colonizers' tongue. Rukaiya translated her own work, Padmarag, from Bengali, while Sultana's Dream is written in English and published from Madras in Indian Ladies magazine. Jyotirmai Devi was proficient in Hindi and Urdu, and her Eipar Ganga, Opar Ganga was translated as the river churning, a partitional novel. I look forward to today's discussion as a magic casement opening wide so that women writers and text remaining in comparative oblivion can be explored from various critical perspectives. I wish this program all success. Thank you to all to be here in this program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to
Thank
Suparna.
you so much. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for finding time. We know how busy you are for, and the reasons also are known to us. So, thank you once
আচ্ছা,
again,
শুনতে
ma'am.
পেয়েছো? আমি তোমাদের কথাটা কিন্তু একটু কম শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
না ম্যাম, আপনাকে পরিষ্কার শুনতে পেয়েছি আমরা। So, after the inaugural address of our respected principal, now we go ahead with our program. So, the first talk, the first address will be Professor Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya, head of the Department of English and Culture Studies, University of Bardhaman, and she will be speaking about feminist interventions, revisiting Rukaiya. I request you, Nandini, to please take the stage.
Right. So, good morning and thank you, Madam Principal, Suparna, and all the members of the department and the college for giving me a space to share my views. It's not like a Delphic oracle, but I'll simply share my views, which are in a formative stage and which I hope will enrich your proceedings regarding the woman intellectual, the woman not just as a body, as a means of having successors, sons, but a woman who's an intellectual, who can write, who can think. So let me admit in the beginning that this study of Rokeya is part of my study on Vidyasagar and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and I find some remarkable similarities between these two feminists. Even though Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar is not a woman, I believe that the word feminist means somebody who fights for the rights of the sexually marginalized classes. In most cases, this would be women. And therefore, both of them are feminists and both of them have empowered women in various ways, which is why I find them to occupy congruent spaces. Now, very quickly for the students, that Rokeya Hussain was born of Zahiruddin Ali Saber, Muhammad Ali Saber, in the village of Pairabandh, which is in the northwest of, in Rangpur, which is in the northwest of Bangladesh now, but was born in undivided Bengal. All right. And so she was mostly published in newspapers and journals, which were edited by Muslims, but also some very important Hindu writers. So, I will come to the reason for this statement that I'm making. Now, the other thing is that she was home educated. I mean, if you compare her to Vidyasagar, I mean, it seems like such an odd comparison. I mean, she was born in 1880, she died in 1932. Vidyasagar was at least 50 years older than her. He was a star. He was a great male figure and somebody who could even influence the colonial state to reform its laws, so to empower women, especially the law of 1856 that permitted widow remarriage. He fought for eradication of polygamy, Kulin polygamy, and his being part of Bethune School, his being part of various bodies in which literature could be produced, and he himself produced literature, is something that I would call a feminist intervention. Say, a very important feminist intervention which allowed women to occupy Bangla and to use Bangla as a tool to express themselves. I mean, when we are talking of various feminist writers, or maybe just women writers, who are expressing themselves for the first time. Let us not forget Bidyasagar, who gave them a Bangla to write in, all right, a Bangla to think in. So let me come back to Rokeya and say that Rokeya is similar to Bidyasagar. Rokeya established, she was educated mostly by her elder sister, Karimun Nisa, who was found. She is another woman whom I think you should be remembering. She was a poet, but circumstances and extreme uh, establishment of parda processes, seclusion processes that forbid Karimunnisa to study, even though her father had indulged her and allowed her to study Bengali when he had caught her reading a Misro Bhashar Puthi, then a Musulmani Bangla. However, she was married off very quickly, but she retained her interest in Bangla. Now, what is the great problem that Rokeya had to face when she came? And just one more thing, that she was also educated in English, Urdu, and Arabic by her elder brother, whom her father, thankfully, both her two brothers, uh, Ibrahim Saber, most important, they had been sent to St. Xavier's College for education, higher education. So it is the ambient support or the ambient atmosphere of her elder brother and elder sister that allowed Rokeya to flower. Otherwise, she too belonged to seclusion, and she too uh, uh, was born in a family where even Mehram, which is outside, uh, women would be seen as being beparda. So she talks about her childhood when they would run and hide whenever a woman from another family visited them, let alone a man. And there would be days on end where she would go off into the terrace, and there would be no food for her. People would generally forget her. So this is the extreme nature of seclusion, the extreme nature of parda, which the aristocratic uh, Muslims practiced in Bengal. In, of course, they practiced it in North India as well, but that is another story. We are talking about Bengal, so let us sort of keep to Bengal and the very great disadvantages, the impediments that she faced in her taking up the pen, lekhuni, uh, uh, to assume the pen. It's actually far more difficult than, say, someone like Jyotirmoy Devi, someone like Kailash Bashini, someone like say Rashundari, because I mean, let me first put the and anyway, again, just quickly, her biography. She was married at the age of 16 to a educated gentleman, uh, Syed Sakhawat Hussain, and it is also Syed Sakhawat Hussein's good influence and his wider world as a part of colonial administration that helped her to grow. And she also read her husband's letters. She worked as almost his secretary. This also helped in her growing up. Now, let me come to the important impediment that Rokeya suffered from, which, say, a Hindu woman writing in Bangla did not suffer from. Now, the first impediment was, of course, seclusion, parda. And I am going to talk about parda later on in my talk. Now, the second point that I would like to mention is uh, the question of Bangla. All right. the question of Bangla is something that you would assume that someone would be, I mean, someone like Rokeya would be using naturally as a Bengali. However, the Indian Muslims, especially the Ashraf Muslims, were very, very particular about seeing themselves as some sort of probashi in India, and originating in, uh, say, Iran or Persia or the Arabia, and therefore they are here only for a short time. So they see their language as primarily for writing, for reading the Quran and other sacred texts, Arabic. They see that as Arabic, so Arabic must be learned, and Persian simply because Persian was the official language of the colonial state till as late as 1837. So even if English was introduced in 1834, please remember that Persian continued, and even if after it was abolished, you can see from legal words like if you have bought a house, for example, or a piece of land, patta, rawana, or these legal terms still are in Persian, or what in Bengali we call Farsi. Now, so a vernacularized version of Farsi would be Urdu. And that is what the aristocratic Muslims were mostly speaking in. Therefore, when Karimul Nisa was caught reading a book which was written in Bangla, that was what created an alarm, apart from the fact that a woman was reading a book which itself would make her beparda. So look at the double impediment. A, that a woman should not read because it violates the conditions of parda, and or right, for that example, for that's one step further. And secondly, that a woman should only read a little Urdu, because that is the language of the Indian Muslim. So both these impediments she had to overcome. And I would like to read out a letter that she wrote on her pad in as the principal of Sakhawat Memorial School, Girls' School, in November 30, 1977. And she quotes a letter to the editor that has been written to the periodical called the Musalman. So I'm just reading this out. Sir, a correspondent by the name of Mr. R. Rahman wrote in a letter in your issue of 25th May last, and I'm reading that letter, which Rokeya quotes. What I regret in the capital of a presidency inhabited by an overwhelming majority of Bengali speaking people is that there is not a single institution for Muslim girls where education is imparted through the medium of Bengali. If any separate school for Bengali speaking Muslim girls be needed, it ought to be started without delay. And this is what Rokeya says. I have been living in this town, that is Calcutta, for the last 7 years at a stretch. And during this long period, I had occasion to come in contact with a good many respectable Mohammedan ladies. And I do not remember to have heard Bangla being spoken by them. I started talking to them in Bengali, but they preferred to give their replies in Urdu. Many of these ladies, though natives of Bengal, say that they have forgotten Bengali. They can only talk bad Urdu, but still they must talk Urdu. When I started this school, that is Sakhawat Memorial School, in Waliullah Lane, which is in Janbajar, at the beginning of 1911 with only 15 or 16 girls, I used to teach English as an additional subject with a view to popularize the institution with the local people, and I made it a practice to explain the meaning of English words in Bengali. Very soon, requests poured from the guardians of pupils to use Urdu as the medium for explaining English. So you can see the double impediment of Lekhuni Dhara. The one that there is the question of parda, and very few women are willing to come. And if they come in a kind of bus which is sort of encased in black chadar. And even then, the girls are almost suffocated. So, on one hand, there are a group of people, parents, who say that I'm not going to send my girl to be killed and suffocated just because she has to learn, be educated. And then there are another group of people who say that, well, I saw the part of that chadar being whisked away by the wind, and so you have made my girls beparda. And so it's between the skilla and the sharibdis. I mean, there is no uh, way in which one can win. So Rokea's contribution to Bengali writing, I think, is spectacular, simply because of the far greater impediments she had to navigate in order to access Bangla. See, it's because you simply have the language, it seems so easy. আমি একটু বাংলায় লিখে ফেললাম. But you never think that how this language came to you, how it has become your own, and what are the struggles which have made it your own. All right. So, in the case of Hindu women, the struggle was far lesser, because there were male reformists like Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar who had already structured a Bangla out of very Tatshama words. So it was highly Sanskritized. So for a Muslim woman, it was doubly difficult to enter into a Bangla, to access a Bangla which is full of Tatshama words, and which is to an extent Hinduized, you know. So when we have someone like Mir Musharraf Hussain who's writing Bishad Sindhu, there are people like Bankim Chandra who say that, oh, this must have been written by a Hindu. Look at the language, it's so tatshama. All right. So look at the various levels of impediment that a Muslim woman writer accessing Bangla at the turn of the century had to uh, encounter. By the turn of the century, there were already quite important Hindu women writers who were making a name in Bengali writing. In fact, Rokeya talks about Mankumari Devi, talks about a number of poets primarily, but so many of the Tagore family women had already started writing, and their task was relatively simpler. So it's one thing to say that I want to take the pen, all right, and to make a lot of poetry about it. It's another thing to understand how taking the pen is not at all a uncritical task. I mean, you can't uncritically take a pen. You can't uncritically take a language. A language has to be made your own through the through an interpretative community, and that interpretative community was unfortunately divided along communal lines, and it took a great deal of doing on the part of people like Kazi Nazrul Islam, with whom Rokeya was well acquainted, with Mir Musharraf Hussain, who was condemned by his community for writing against Go Hatta, and Rokeya Hussain, who was constantly shifting. The principal madam just talked about how many languages these writers inhabited and how many spaces they inhabited. Now, just look, Rokeya was writing in English. Her Sultana's Dream is something that we have introduced very recently in our BA syllabus. So maybe you all have read it too. And she was writing fluently in English because, as she said, she was influenced by Gulliver's Travels and she was very fond of Swift. And so this is a kind of fantasy, a speculative kind of writing, a visionary kind of writing. Now, I will come to Sultana's Dream. The other thing is that she was also writing in Bangla. So she between Bangla and she was speaking in Urdu. All right. So between this English and Bangla and her keeping Urdu, the Urdu interpretative community at, uh, in negotiation, so that she could create a Bangla which accommodated the aspirations of people who believed that Urdu was their primary language, was a phenomenal task. You see, I would say that it is a phenomenal task what Rokia has achieved. And her Bangla is so flowing. Her first piece is Pipasha, which was published, I think, in Nabonur, the periodical Nabonur, and it's so bonkimi, all right, but it is actually based on Jangnama and the story of Hassan and Hussein, the Battle of Karbala, which is central to Islamic astrology. So this is the problem. I mean, when there is not a fit between the language you are using and the subject that you are addressing, you have an extra impediment as well as an extra opportunity. Rokia is so brilliant because she is able to bat on a pitch which is rough, and she's batting on the last day when it is broken and the ball is spinning. All right, she has every impediment. It's dark, the ball is spinning, and the pitch is broken. But despite that, খুঁটে খুঁটে রান নেওয়া যাকে বলে, she is able to score a century, because not because of the impediments, but despite the impediments provide the spur to her lekhoni. Now, the second point I would like to mention is that Rokia, like Vidyasagar, is firmly embedded and working within her religious cultures and traditions. All right. Now, this seems like an odd statement to make, given that both Vidyasagar and Rokia attacked some of the most dearly held customs of their respective communities, ridiculed and exposed the flaws of those communities to foreign colonizers, actively collaborated with the colonial government to eradicate and change such customs. At the same time, they are repeatedly deploying evidence that is gleaned from their respective faith texts to convince traditionalist groups, the colonial government, and garner mass support for their cause. So, Amio Prasad Sen has taught me one word, and it is orthopraxy. That is not orthodoxy, but orthopraxy. Vidyasagar and Rokia are orthopraxists in the sense that they are not mere rationalists who are using parts of, say, Parashar to nashte mrite prabhojite, the to support the widow remarriage. Vidyasagar finds textual evidence in the Hindu scriptures to support widow remarriage, the five conditions when a widow can be remarried. So why does Vidyasagar do such a thing when it's quite obvious that Vidyasagar thought that the terrible condition of Hindu widows was wrong, it was inhuman. All right, so he's a feminist in the sense of uh, fighting for a sexual marginality. He's wanting to include a sexual marginality within a larger human group, giving them human rights. So he's a human rights warrior. A feminist is always a human rights warrior. And so is Rokia. But Rokia, look at her essays like God Gives, Man Robs, Educational Ideals for the Modern Indian Girl, and many such essays. I'm talking of some English essays because this is the Department of English, where she is quoting from the Quran and the Hadith texts to say that the girl should be taught. Nowhere in Islam has it been told that girls should be left like beasts, all right, and treated merely as an object of sexual enjoyment and sexual instrument to produce children. Now, this sort of an orthopraxy is, in the case of Rokeya, related to a larger reformist movement within Islam, which I'm not talking of reformist movements within Hindus, which everybody knows, the Brahmo movement, the establishment of the Tattvabodhini Sabha, when Umesh Chandra and his wife, who was a miner who converted to Christianity, and then Devendranath felt that, oh dear, Hindu Dharma is going to the dogs. And so he established something like a Sabha, and he even called Radhakanto Dev, who was very much against Ram Mohan and his Brahmoism. But this is the moment when Hindu orthodoxy and orthopraxy come together. And of course, they decide that there must be reform within Hindu uh, community. And we cannot allow intelligent, intellectual Hindu men and women to go over to Christianity simply because they are, uh, bothered with these numerous impediments to self-improvement and impediments to enter into colonial modernity, to take the fruits of colonial modernity. So I'm not going over the establishment of the Tattvabodhini Sabha and the reform movements that begin, the Hindu college and so on and so forth. These all of you know. What I am going to refer to is a little less known to us, and that is the Devandhi movement, which began in North India, near Kanpur, and around a seminary which was in Deoband, therefore called the Devandhi movement. Today, the Tablighi movement that you see has its roots in that Devandhi movement. Now, the Deobandis, of whom, as a person of literature, I am only aware of, is Ashraf Ali Thanavi. This is because his Bihishti Zevar is a text that Rokeya actually refers to. And it's a text that I have read for my own reasons. Now, Bihishti Zevar, or heavenly ornaments, is a good point to start, because this is a text, though very, very puritanical, misogynistic, and harsh and prescriptive. It does admit that men and women can read and write and should read and write, and women should be taught to read and write, though women's education must necessarily be limited. And that some of the customs, like the great desire for zevar, alankar, is wrong. So he's repositioning the word zevar to mean good acts, acts of piety, which will give you that ornament. Now, remember that the second essay that Rokeya writes was first called Alankar, or Badges of Slavery. That she had read Behshti Zevar it was published in 1905. Rokeya's first piece in English was, she had written in Bengali before that. In English, Sultana's Dream was published more or less at the same time in the Ladies' Magazine in Madras. So this is that, the other tradition in which Rokeya could participate, and where she found strength about purifying one's religion, not going over to Christianity, not going over to the Brahmos, not becoming going out of your religion in order to educate your women, but to go back to a pristine Islam. Whether that existed or not is another thing, but going back to a pristine Islam, going back to a more cosmopolitan Islam, in Turkey, Iran, Egypt, etc., Albania, to talk about women's rights and about a more humane and a more let's say a more positive approach to parda. All right. So the other writer that Rokeya is constantly referring to is Deputy Nazir Ahmed and his the 3 books, which are like a trilogy, where they talk about Miratul Arus, which is the most well known. And she's also talking about these 3 books because they talk about women's education in the form of novels. Now, this orthopraxy, I hope I have been able to establish what is orthopraxy, but not by saying Islam is bad and let me become a Christian in order to partake the fruits of colonial modernity, but to go back to your own religion, to review, to re-look at it, and to reform it, reposition it, so that you can have women taking the pen. All right. So just quickly, because I'm sure I have spoken more than I should, I'm going to look at 2 of her writings, one being Sultana's Dream, which is about a girl called Sultana, who is sitting in the night just outside her bedroom. And why is she outside her bedroom? Because it is the night and people, especially servants, can't see her. So the night provides a kind of parda. All right. This is one point which not many have mentioned. I mean, I keep saying that Sultana's Dream is a novel about parda, about not about you know speculations or utopian writing about female world, though that too is there. But when she is in a dream state, there is bright light. Now, this is something that cannot be ignored. That in the world of her dreams, she is out into the streets in bright light, no longer in darkness, no longer in parda. Even though in this lady land, the men have been put in a mardana and the women have not only read and write, but they are involved in various scientific experiments. Now, this novel has often been portrayed as a feminist utopia and a feminist novel, a novelette, and it has been paired with Paddarag, which is a story about, again, a young girl called Siddhika and a ashram kind of a utopian space which is Tarini Bhavan, where all kinds of people from Christian, Brahmo, Hindu, Muslim, they all come and they all have equal rights. And it is a very ambient space for women. Now, I would rather, because these are paired because one is a feminist utopia and the other is and Siddhika in the end finds her to be husband, but decides not to be married. So in that sense, it's a fairly progressive novel. But this pairing of Rokea's Sultana's Dream and Paddarag is something that I really don't agree to, because I would have paired it with 2 other works. One would be Unnotir Path and the other would be Nurse Nelly. Unnotir Path is again a short visionary kind of writing. There are various Rokeya writings which use the structure of a vision or a dream. So one is in a dream. Here, the person who is in a dream is a man. He's an older man, Unnotir Path. All right, is an older man, and Sultana's Dream has been translated by Rokeya in Bengali in the 2nd volume of Nabunu. I'm sorry, Motichur. The Unnotir Path, which comes right after the writing of the translation of Sultana's Dream, this is what it says, that this old man who has seen an advertisement for Christian salt, whatever that is, some sort of a vitamin, I guess, which says that if you take this, you will become young. So this man takes it and he becomes like 20 years old. And soon he finds himself among a group of Muslims. It's a sort of a Islamic, pan-Islamic group, people from Albania, from Turkey, from Iran, from Iraq, from Egypt. So, and they are all flying in a kind of future going machine. And in this, they are shedding all the structures of seclusion, and they are also shedding their beards and their hair, and then they are shedding their clothes, their hats, their coat, and soon they are starting to wear the uh, portions of barks of trees, and then they become naked. So they have reached the level of Adam and Haba, our primal father and mother. I mean, our means within the Abrahamic religions, within Christianity and Islam. So here is a kind of a essay, a novel, which is very traditional, you see, which is talking about the ill effects of being beparda. So how do you then, the next one, let me finish my lecture by with this one. This is Nurse Nelly. This is a longer piece and a more, you know, more like a story, but it is supposed to be based on the life of Rokeya. This seems like this story. There is a girl, they have gone to Lucknow, and the narrator is unnamed, and they go to see somebody who's unwell. It's a Hindu lady, and then she finds a nurse who's called Nurse Nelly, whom she finds very familiar. But this girl is being made to do all the work, the absolutely dirty work of collecting shit, blood, cleaning up the urine, and things like that, which usually the lowest castes do. But she's still called a nurse, which is only a glorified term. And it is learned that she's a Bengali Christian. Now, as the novel unfolds, it is found that Nelly is actually Naima, and she was this narrator's chachera behen. I mean, she's a cousin, and this girl was, her father had died. He was a spendthrift, and the narrator's mother had taken her in within their family and had got her married to her own son. So the chachera behen now becomes the wife of his of her beloved Bhaijan. But as soon as she's married, Naima, and her brother has become a collector, and she she's exposed to a world of power. All right, her mind begins to change, and then of course there she falls ill, and there are some Christian nurses or doctors who come and treat her, and they talk about Christianity. When she's well, she has turned into a very different person, and she keeps telling her mother-in-law, who was earlier her aunt-in-law, Chachi, that why haven't you taught me anything? Why haven't you taught me English? Why haven't you taught me to write and read? And then the Chachi and the Shashuri is very sort of surprised that suddenly Naima is talking so much, talking back, as it were. And she says that, look, in the village, this is all that we could afford. There aren't any such facilities. But if you want to study, then she tells her son, why don't you get her some teachers? These teachers who come to teach her are all Christian missionaries. And very soon, Naima leaves her family with 25,000 rupees and a lot of ornaments. The missionaries use her as a prize catch because she comes from a rich family. Remember Madhusudan, who had been touted as a catch because he was a rich man who had converted, a rich man's son who had converted. Whereas most people, say like Lal Bihari Dey, were very poor. So naturally, for money and for some advantages, they would convert. So this is Naima is touted, but soon the missionaries take away all her money and ornaments, and she's left to the dogs, and she's reduced to a mere carrier of shit and urine in a local hospital. When the whole story is unraveled, this is what the narrator goes and tells her Bhaijan, and the Bhaijan wants to kill Naima and then kill himself by shooting, and the news comes that Naima is dead. all right, or Nurse Nelly is dead, prepare for her coffin. So what is the, if you keep Sultana's dream and you keep Unnotir Path and Nurse Nelly, what are the two conflicting ideas that you are getting? The one conflicting idea is that women should not be taught too much and women should not be taught at all right, that is, then they turn, like, they shed all their clothes as in Unnotir Path, or they shed all their haya as in Nurse Nelly. Okay, they leave behind their good husband, their good child, their good mother-in-law, and become harridans, and then they suffer. But the other uh, you know uh, idea would be, this is what I would say, is that teach Muslim girls, give them education, and give them education through Islamic schools, establish schools for Muslim girls so that Muslim girls are educated and they don't have to run to Hindu schools or to Christian missionary schools to be educated. And this is one way, I mean, this is that orthopraxy. You revive your own religion, you revive your own community, and you work within your own community. To be within your own community, to be rooted within your own community, doesn't mean that you're not generous towards others. But if you have no roots, then you cannot write. All right. So Sakhawat Memorial School, which today is a premier government school, is the result of such orthopraxy. And women, the 15 first students, some of them became very famous writers, administrators, and Sakhawat Memorial School remains an exemplar of these many negotiations that women had to undertake in order to take up the Lekhuni. Thank you. Can't hear you.
Uh,
Yeah. You have muted yourself. You have muted yourself.
am I audible now?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Nandini. This we had kept a really a slot which would have extended for another, say, 20-25 minutes, because whenever Nandini talks, we listen in rapt attention, not only at the way she approaches a subject but makes us think about it. And this time it was no different at all. So I'm sure our audience have need to interact or express their views about this wonderful session. But we would, if you allow, we would keep the interaction session at the end of our program today, and we can take up questions for both the speakers. So I would now request Professor Bulu Mukhopadhyay, Associate Professor of the Department of English, New Alipur College, to please deliver her address on Jyotirmoy Devi. Buludi, it's all yours.
Yes, am I audible? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Buludi, you're absolutely
Okay,
audible.
thank you.
Thank you.
Very good morning to all of you.
But
Can
one
you
thing,
hear me? Yes?
Buludi, camera, I think you just need to shift a bit because the camera is a bit of out of focus, maybe.
No, this way. Yes.
No,
Is it okay
yes,
now? Yes.
absolutely perfect. Yes.
Yes. I thank the principal of Calcutta Girls College and Shuparna Bhattacharya, head of the Department of English, Calcutta Girls College, for inviting me here. I was the one word with which I can explain the speech which I was listening till now. I was just spellbound. Once again, Nandini, just left me spellbound with her wonderful speech. So I am simply aghast. I mean, I just can't express it in my own words. However, we are standing at a very difficult situation, especially when all the households in our city are devastated with the pandemic. At this time, we are no, I mean, I am simply honored to be invited by Calcutta Girls College for organizing this webinar, Lekhoni Korite Ichchuk. Uh, when Nandini was speaking, I found that whatever I was about to speak, it has some connection with what Nandini was speaking. The condition of women in the earlier century, especially in the earlier part of the 20th century, and how was it? So it has some connection with link with each other. However, I would like to talk about Jyotirmoyi Devi. Jyotirmoyi Devi's dates are 1893 to 1988, right? And as Principal Dr. Shobta Upadhyay has already mentioned, yes, she was brought up in Rajasthan, and in her works also you find some reflections of Rajasthan. But what you find so interesting, what at least I find so interesting is about Jyotirmoyi Devi is that she did not receive much formal education. Right? She just read some of the books by Ishwar Chandra Vidyashagar, and then later, after being a widow, she joined the Mahakali Pathshala. But her range of learning was simply quite large. So I would just like to read out from some of her articles which were published in various magazines of the time, various famous contemporary magazines. I would just like to quote from one of them. Relation with mother, wife, or daughter is not exactly of benevolent charity, nor is it judgmental. The magic wand or golden touch of knowing a human being does not depend on any person, but is renewed with environment, every touch on the mental cord. Perhaps the social and psychological scientists are yet to realize that women are human beings too. Quite often, women silently listen to what men speak, inwardly thinking, you are looking at the world through your own looking glass. As a man knows himself, women also know themselves. The only difference lies in ways of self expression. So these lines are quoted from Jyotirmoyi Devi's article, Somosya Kader Okano. This was written by Jyotirmoyi Devi and was published in the Kartik or October-November issue of the contemporary renowned magazine Vichitra. It was published in 1929. She writes that thinkers like Schopenhauer, Ludovici, and many others were writing something, but if that is compiled, will amount to an anthology as voluminous as the Indian epic Mahabharata, and nonetheless interesting or informative either. So she now let us look at the condition of women. I mean, in India, like from the beginning of the Vedic age, we know how women were in the earliest times. Women were allowed to learning. The learned women of the Vedic age included Ghosha, Lopamudra, Opala, Indrani, who were called rishis or sage. They were women who were famous fighters as well. Vishpala, Mudgalani are some of them. And they were also allowed to perform yoga or religious rites. At that time, age of marriage was 16 to 17 years. So this account can be found in Ramesh Chandra Mojumdar's Bangla Gadder Suchana of Bharater Nari Pragati. However, we also know about Maitreyi, who said she did not want any ornament or any material gifts, and she said, Yenaham namritasyam kimaham tena kuryam. What am I to do with that which will not enable me to conquer death. This we can find in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishads. But time passed, there were social changes, and that deteriorated the status of women, which included the lowering of marriageable age to ensure chastity and virginity in women because patriarchy required them. And this age onwards, woman was considered as the material property of men. She was no longer the friend, philosopher, or guide as Kalidas wanted. Grihini Sachiva Sakhi Priya Shishya Lalite Kalavidho. That is, woman is supposed to be the not only the wife but also the friend, the partner, the secretary, everything, a good student for the man. But no, I mean this position was changing, and a woman was becoming only the object for reproduction. The Manu Samhita laid down the rules for a Hindu to follow, and that declares no independence for women. Who will look after woman? Pita rakshati kaumare, bharta rakshati yauvane, rakshanti sthavire putra, nasti swatantram arhati. That is, woman is always to be protected. She is to be protected by her father in her childhood, by her husband during her youth, and by her son during her old age. So that was the situation. This you find in Manu Samhita, chapter 9, sloka 3. And Jyotirmai Devi, in her article Women's Rights in Independent India, which is published in Bharat Barsho, Ashar 1954, Ashar means June, July, she wrote, since the ancient times, women are not considered human beings, but the liability of men who can be gifted, can be relinquished, is to be borne as a burden. Women are not allowed fundamental rights as human beings. Perhaps their demands were not regarded of any value either. It is strange that women, both individually and as a whole community, have obeyed these laws and prohibitions and are obeying them still now. So now this acceptance of women folk of their lot is a result of social construction of the gender. It takes place through the workings of ideology, a system of beliefs and assumptions which is unconscious, unexamined, invisible, which represents the imaginary relationships of individual to their real condition of existence. Thus, a woman grows to be a cultural construct, is presented as natural to bear children, and she's a which this is a natural phenomenon. Responsibility. The share of man as father is overlooked. So partial truths are obscured. They're obscuring coherence. Medieval darkness was emerging all over India with the Parda system, and there was ban on women's education, child marriage. Polygamy was practiced among men folk, and with this, Jyotirmai Devi was writing, this is the wastage of a part of human life under the social rule. This Jyotirmai Devi was writing in her article Amar Lekhar Gorar Kotha, which was published in Shokhi Sambad in 1968-69. She wrote, this is the wastage of a part of human life under the social rule, and that world is of woman. A world of wastage who has a mind but her intellect is carved, who has a heart but her emotion is not honored, like melody without song, thought without language. Just imagine that Jyotirmai Devi was thinking so deeply. So let us have a look at the society once again. With polygamy, as polygamy was being practiced, there were several widows at the death of one man. And I think we are all familiar with the term colonial protha. This was introduced by Bolal Shen, and there used to be with the colonial protha, the Hindu Brahmins could marry several women, and there used to be many widows at the death of one man, and after the death of her husband, the property of the man would pass gifts to his widow, right? And therefore, you see, the relatives of the dead would want the women to be the widow to be dead, would want the widow to be dead, and so there was the practice of sati, right? Sati, or burning of the widow in the funeral pyre of her husband. This obnoxious custom was actually protested against by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and I think we all know the date, that was 1829, with the help of Lord William Bentinck, that the custom of sati was abolished. And we should remember that the number of widows increased the number of women who attempted escape, because widows were forced to have one full meal a day. They were not supposed to wear colored clothes among the Hindus, and they were supposed to fast twice a month. So there were many such other prohibitions on their lifestyle. And you see, many women attempted escape and ended their lives in brothels. A government report of 1853 reveals that the number of Hindu prostitutes amounted to 10,000 in Kolkata. Most of them were widows or runaway wives of Kulin Brahmins. This we can find in Kulin Polygamy, the Calcutta Review, which was published in 1868. Jyotirmoy Devi was feeling sympathetic for these women who were to suffer for the fault which was committed jointly by both men and women. Now, we must remember that in this point, as Nandini has repeatedly mentioned Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and it was Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar who felt sorry for this condition of the Hindu widows. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar has also mentioned once, I think we are familiar with his expression, "Ha অবলাগণ, তোমরা কি পাপে ভারতবর্ষে নারী হইয়া জন্মগ্রহণ করো, বলিতে পারি না." Even now, when I read this line by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, I feel goosebumps on myself. Actually, we all are indebted to Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. However, Jyotirmoy Devi was writing, "These fickle-minded, unlucky women who blunder or commit sin are visible to everyone, whereas sin of man remains unnoticed. So these women are driven away from the society, with man continuing to be the social chief, the virtuous saint, enjoying comfort and pleasure, exploiting womenfolk." This she wrote in her article Narir Kotha, which was first published in Bharat Barsha, the renowned magazine, during September-October 1921. However, we find that along with Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who helped in finding the Widow Remarriage Act in 1856, we also know that in 1849, Bethune founded Hindu Female School, and the daughters of Madan Mohan Tarkalankar, Debendranath Thakur, they were among the first students. Ram Gopal Ghosh, Dakshina Ranjan Mukhopadhyay, they assisted Bethune in this work of his. Okay. Now, Bethune found that the progress of the young girls in Hindu Female School was as rapid as the boys of their own age. Now, as we were listening in the speech of my previous speaker, we will find that before Hindu women were being educated, there were also many such prohibitions that if women are educated, they will become widows, they will learn to lead illicit relationships, they will not look after their children. There were all such prohibitions on education of Hindu women as well. Madan Mohan Tarkalankar argued, "Creator of this universe has only left some physical discrimination between a boy and a girl without any such difference regarding mental power. Therefore, why won't the girls be able to learn what the boys can?" That is what's said by Madan Mohan Tarkalankar. This we can find in Ramesh Chandra Majumdar's Vidyasagar, বাংলা গদ্যের সূচনা ও ভারতের নারী প্রগতি. However, as I was telling you, Jyotirmoyi Devi also did not receive any formal education. She became a widow at the tender age of 25. She read the five texts of Vidyasagar, Kathamala, Bodhodoy and Barnapurichaya part 1, 2 and 3. And she read a few pages of Taricharan Sarkar's first book before her marriage. Later, she was taught English by her husband during their brief conjugal life. She was widowed at the age of 25, as I was telling you. She joined Mahakali Pathshala, which offered traditional learning to Hindu girls. But however, most of her learning was informal. Jyotirmoyi Devi was writing while discussing the prospect of introduction of Western education, which was opposed by men in Bengal. Jyotirmoyi Devi wrote, "Men feel insecure at the prospect of women's education in case the oppressed learn to understand their oppression and rebel against it. Hence, the plays used against English education that is supposed to contaminate the sacred Indian ideals. Luckily, they say that women have been saved from such, that the skeleton of Orthodox Hinduism is intact. Do not, therefore, you see, that's she was writing, do not therefore allot indulgence to the self-willed assertiveness of the holy Suraglio. This she wrote in Narir Kotha in part 4. However, this essay was published again in Bharatvarsho in 1921, and it moved the Orthodox Hindus and their self-complacence. She also wrote in the context of co-education in an article published in Joyasri in 1933, the fear that men experience regarding women's education is out of a desire similar to that in the powerful to keep the powerless and weak forever weak and dependent to them. So once again we find how Jyotirmoyi Devi was simply exploring the kind of injustice meted out to women by patriarchy. You see, Virginia Woolf also commented in 1928, the history of men's opposition to women's emancipation is more interesting perhaps than the story of that emancipation itself. That Virginia Woolf wrote in A Room of One's Own. Now, however, as the colonial rulers attempted to spread Western education in India, the Indian natives accepted the Western theories, as the superstitions of their traditional seemed quite rejectable, and there was a kind of a Westernization in them. However, the fiction writers of Bangla literature in the 19th century realized the need of women's education. We find that the heroines of Dinabandhu Mitra, Jyotirindranath Tagore, Upendranath Das, we find that they have created characters who were educated. Even Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, who was conservative in his social outlook, portrayed his heroines as educated. These plays and novels, especially the novels of Bankim, had a tremendous influence over the educated Bengalis. However, the creative writers often work in the colonies as intermediaries, right? So the ability to wrest works of art from the past by means of new interpretations can be seen. So they are translated into a new present to make the experiences preserved in past art accessible again. However, we find that Jyotirmoyi Devi was getting familiar with the works of several Western authors. Her creative mind accepted some of their thoughts. She questioned some of them, and she was writing in her article Chirantan Nari Jigyasa. She was discussing the age-old social problems of women due to gender discrimination. She realized that gender discrimination is a social construct. So she deconstructed the myth of chastity among women as a gift from patriarchy superimposed on the cultural process. She wrote, those who tolerate tyranny and those who tyrannize neither deserve the name human The worst luck is that those poor women are incapable of realizing their misery, perhaps they support it. Jyotirbai Devi could read underneath the lines of the traditional texts of her country with her sympathetic soul and her open mind. She evaluated the epics and theological texts and questioned. Praise of chastity is found at some places, but isn't it only the eulogy of male worship? Only the satisfaction of the husband god? And her irony aimed at husband god, it hurt the interest of many, because truth hurts. The holy men also prescribed women as evil. Men and women are both sinners. Yes, it is women who are mentioned as the object of temptation. For example, we can find it is said by the holy men that women and gold, that is material objects, both are leading men towards downfall, towards sinning. And there are songs like the famous songs by Sri Ram Prasad, who says that a woman is nectar from above, but poison beneath. You will suffer pain if you drink eagerly. Now, Jyotirmai Devi is asking, were the mothers, daughters, or sisters of these great wise souls of our country all unchaste, witch-like personalities? And she also says, many superstitions continue in the society, but all are practiced as they protect the interest of patriarchy. They have never thought of mother, wife, or daughter. That is why half of this large human society have been compelled to lead the lives of slaves. In the colonial setup, woman is doubly exploited. She is undergoing subjection both from the colonial rulers as well as her country, and the latter is coercing her underneath the garment of patriarchy. So we can find similarities between Victorian and Indian. So you see, sexual gratification is not supported, is not really acknowledged. Woman submits to her husband, but only to please him, and but for the desire for maternity. Her own desire is never acknowledged. Therefore, Indian lawgiver Manu has said, Prajanartham Striya Srishta, in chapter 9, slok 96 of Manu Samhita, that is, woman wife is to reproduce, and Prajanartham Mahabhaga, woman's best culmination is motherhood, as we find in Manu Samhita, chapter 9, sloka 26. However, Jyotirmai Devi was familiar with the works of women who were writing during the 19th and early 20th century. She was not satisfied. That is why Jyotirmai Devi wrote in 1967, although woman consists of half of the mankind, she has not written her own history. This is something very important, isn't it? Woman has never written her own history of her agony or ecstasy, social good or evil, her religion, her action, her affection, sacrifices or responsibilities, everything has been observed as complementary to man and by man from his point of view. Man has revealed her secret thoughts, intentions in his language. Her activities and ideal world have been prescribed and determined by man according to his convenience. But is that true? Woman has never uttered a word of approval or protest. And patriarchal society has taken it for granted that woman is just like what men say. She has written in the introduction to her novel written on partition, Epar Ganga, Opar Ganga, in actual fact, even Vedavyasa could not bear to write the real Stri Parva. Cowards do not write history. There are no great poets among women, and even if there were, they could not have written about the violation of their own dignity. Hence, there is no recorded history of the real Stri Parva of humiliation by men. The Stri Parva of all time. The chapter that remains under control of husband, son, father, and wife own corridor. There is no history of that final humiliation, that final pain. The Sri Parva has not ended. The last word is not yet spoken. That was what Jyotirmoy Devi wrote. And you see, society discriminates women into two categories, chaste or unchaste. So there is the pure chaste virgin of respectable fiction who duly blossom into the model wife and mother, the angel in the house. And then you see there is also the unchaste woman, the femme fatale, the dangerous sex. So the gallery of chaste women includes selfless characters, the sweet women who will never protest, like Sita in the Ramayana, Damayanti in Mahabharata, Beatrice by Dante. These are the chaste women, and the patriarchal society demands women to be the property of menfolk. But patriarchy never protects women from humiliation. So men have chosen to humiliate the women of their opponent to express their rage and vengeance. Battles and rebellions are recorded history of women over whose sexuality political gains were established. And characters like Medusa, Surpanakha, Salome, Delilah, Becky Sharp, Sphinx, the Queen in Snow White, or Rebecca in Dasan du Maurier's novel Rebecca, Rohini in Bankim Chandra's Vishabriksha, Hira in Bankim Chandra's Surjamukhi, Binodini in Rabindranath Tagore's Chokher Bali, Kiranmoyi in Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay's Charitrahin, Koike or Monthara are characters whose consciousness is opaque to men, whose mind will not let itself to be penetrated by the phallic probing of masculine thought. These characters are all portrayed by male authors as with negative aspects. If patriarchal writing is deconstructed, they will be interpreted as human beings. So they are now and then mothers and daughters, but almost without exception, they are shown in their relation to man. It was strange to think that all the great women of fiction were until Jane Austen's day not only seen by the other sex, but seen only in relation to the other sex. So that is only a little part of women's life, isn't it? Jyotirmoyi Devi says the general history of women is only that of the pure, chaste, or the corrupt and the fallen. Sati or Apsara, who led such lives according to the directions of the male-dominated society. There are only those relationships of chaste woman, wife and mother. Wife gradually emerges as mother, and unchaste woman is the object of lust of men through ages. After that, when the biological utility, wifehood and motherhood are over, she is an unnecessary creature, object of neglect and pity. Therefore, there is no history of woman in her own words. Whatever is found is history of biological life and her biological relationship with society. But humanity always surpasses biological needs in creativity, in spheres of art, literature, and religion. That is what Jyotirmoy Devi has written about women. I have only explored a few gems from the works of Jyotirmoy Devi. Now, if my learned listeners can explore her works, can read them, they will find many more. Thank you very much.
Neha, hello, am I audible? Thank you. Thank you, Buludi, for such an interesting exploration of the works and the contribution of Jyoti Devi. I'm still asking, am I audible?
Yes,
I'm
you
not.
are. We can hear you. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Buludi. Now, this was an occasion which we were looking forward to because we were really interested to listen to both our eminent, erudite, and critically acclaimed speakers. And we were very much interested to know how and why 19th century, late 19th century and early 20th century women in Bengal who were going beyond definitive boundaries, and why they were choosing writing lekhoni as something which individualized them, and how they were using it as a tool for expressing themselves. So this is the one of the most interesting session of our webinar, where we will be requesting our audience to put forward your views and comments, and we request both our speakers to be please communicate, interact with our audience. So could we have your comments and queries and views? No, so I would request you to please put it in the chat box so that we can read it out. Now, Nandini Di, one of my friends, he just raised he just wanted to ask you that he was very much interested in the thing of orthopraxy that you were talking about, and he's Professor Basudev Chakraborty. He's teaching English at Jongipur College. He said that that apart from Rokia, is there anyone else who is also cutting across religious categories and trying to move in this direction, or is it Rokia pioneering without anyone taking it up?
There is now a novel that has been discovered by Fazlun Nisa, who was also the wife of a zamindar, and that is perhaps the first Muslim Bengali woman's novel. And I will send you the details of that novel. It is available in translation in a Brill publication, and because everything is closed, so there are very few. Let me say that there are very few. Let me admit that there are very few men as well, who can cross this boundary, which is why I spoke about uh, Qazi Nazrul Islam and about Mir Musharraf Hussain, because the first problem that one acquaints is to inhabit the Bengali language. That is the problem. While there are these Misro Bhasha Puthis, Musulmani Bangla Puthis, which according to Long are being read by boatmen, uh, there, uh, there are very few Bengali texts written in Shuddha Bangla which Muslims are reading or have access to. So it is this pressure of Arabic and Urdu which weighs upon their accessing Bangla. This is another difficulty which you can talk about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nandini. We look forward to the text. And
yes, I will send you the text.
And there's another question which one of my colleagues of the English department in this college, he posted it. He is Shomshubro Midya. So Shomshubro
আচ্ছা,
possibly
বইটার নাম হলো রূপ জালাল, গল্পটার নাম হলো রূপ জালাল। Fazilun Nisa, she was also Begum Fazilun Nisa. She had a zamindar husband. She was widowed like Rokia and was the owner of her own zamindari. And this Roop Jalal is interesting because it's a completely secular novel. It is not, it seems to begin in the form of these romance puthis, but that is not how it pans out. So this is one.
And Nandini, this is something which I was personally interested in. আমাদের তো এত রূপকথা এবং পুরুষ রচিত বা কিছু বাঙালি মহিলা রচিত আছে, তো এখানে আমরা এই যে মুসলিম মহিলাদের লেখা কোনো রূপকথা সন্ধান কি পেয়েছি?
এখন পর্যন্ত আমি তো জানি না, it is I'm sure, after the formation of Bangladesh, see the politics, Suparna, the language of one's own and a territory of one's own. This had become inevitable by the time Rokia was writing. Bangla যেটা উর্দু নয়, আর একটা জায়গা যেটা আমাদের, এই যে dual pressure, it is by seeing Rokia that you can see the emergence, the inevitability of not East Pakistan but of Bangladesh. And once Bangladesh is territorially there, you have a whole host of great writers. I repeat that you need a place of your own. নিজের জায়গা থেকে বিচ্ছিন্ন হয়ে গেলে কেউ কোনো কিছুই করে উঠতে পারে না। এমন রোকেয়া সেই জায়গাটার আমাদের একটা ধারণা দিয়েছিলেন।
May I ask a question? আমার একটা প্রশ্ন ছিল।
বলো।
আচ্ছা, আমার প্রশ্নটা হচ্ছে যে রিগার্ডিং ফার্সি অ্যান্ড উর্দু ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ, আচ্ছা উর্দু ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজটা কি এরকম শুনেছি আমি, আই এম নট ভেরি মাচ শিওর অফ ইট, যে আরবি আর ফার্সি দে ওয়ার দ্য ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ অফ দ্য রুলার, যেরকম একসময় ইংল্যান্ডে ফ্রেঞ্চ ওয়াজ দ্য ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ অফ দ্য রুলিং ক্লাস, সেরকমই বা পরে আমাদের এখানে ইংলিশ ওয়াজ দ্য ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ অফ দ্য রুলিং ক্লাস। তো উর্দুটা কি তার পরে ডেভেলপ করেছে? মানে যখন ইসলামিক রুলাররা ছিল তখন উর্দু ছিল না বোধহয়, তখন আরবিক আর পার্সিয়ান এই দুটোই ছিল। পরে কি উর্দুটা ডেভেলপ করেছে অ্যাজ অ্যান অ্যামালগামেশন অফ হিন্দি অ্যান্ড পার্সিয়ান অর আরবিক? এটা জানতে চাইছিলাম।
The answer is, you have given the answer. The French language did not dominate England at any point, but Latin did.
Yes.
And England was a Roman colony.
Yes.
And legal terms, medical terms are still in Latin. So Arabic was the language of religion, is the language of religion. And Persian is the language of the Mughal court. You have to remember that the Mughals were alive and kicking when Annoda Mongol was being written. So when what Clive had got after the Battle of Palashi was merely a diwani. So there was a dual rule. Persian was very much the language of Bengal and the language of entire India, so far as the official language is concerned. It is the work of the Fort William scholars and pundits that evolved out of Farsi, not Arabic. The Nastaliq script is used, but out of Farsi, a vernacular that one calls Urdu. And of course, Urdu is again conflicted in birth because it is called Hindustani. There are other languages like Hindi, like other Hindi, smaller Hindi regions. I'm not going to use the word dialect because it's derogatory. So they all form what is known as Hindustani. And Gilchrist was the head of the Hindustani department. So one has to look at the establishment of the Fort William College in 1800 for the emergence of Urdu as a separate vernacular language. And of course, one will also have to look at some of the dispatches to see how Urdu is given special prizes. CM Naim has an essay called Five Prize-Winning Adab Novels, of which Miratul Uros is one. So in the later decade of the 19th century, the Urdu is given prizes, and Nasir Hussain actually wins 1,000 rupee prizes. হিন্দি যে লেখে ওই একই গল্প দেবরানী জেঠানি কি কাহানি সেটা 100 টাকা পুরস্কার পেয়েছিল, বাজে লেখা ছিল। উর্দু was the language of not just Muslims, it was the language of very powerful Hindus. একটা ছোট্ট গল্প বলি, যে অন্নদামঙ্গলের যে লেখক ভারতচন্দ্র, যে মডার্ন বাংলা লেখার আরম্ভ, this fellow, he had educated himself in a Sanskrit toll. When he came back home, and they were in a very impoverished situation then, the brothers were, almost about to hit him. টোলে পড়াশোনা করে এসছিস, তো টাকা পয়সা কি হবে? এই অপমানে ও বেরিয়ে গিয়ে রামচন্দ্র মুন্সি বলে একজন হিন্দু বাঙালি মুন্সির কাছে ফার্সি শেখে, যার ফলে সে ইন্দ্রনারায়ণ চৌধুরী চন্দননগরে ফ্রেঞ্চ দিওয়ান তার কাছে চাকরি পায়, এবং তার মাধ্যমে রাজা কৃষ্ণচন্দ্র রায়ের কোর্টে চাকরি পায়, যেখানে সে রায়গুণাকর উপাধি পায় এবং প্রথম বাংলা লেখে, যাতে জবনী ভাষা মিশাল, তাতে অনেক উর্দু শব্দ আছে। তো প্রথম যে মডার্ন বাংলা লেখা, কবিতা লেখা বলবো না, কবিতা, তাতেও কিন্তু প্রচুর উর্দু। I mean, this was a Muslim dominated area. Bengal was a Muslim dominated area. This is historical truth. হ্যাঁ বল। এক রাশি কথা বললাম আর কি, যেখানে অনেক কম কথা বলা উচিত।
অনেকদিন বাদে তোর কথাগুলো শুনতে ভীষণ ভালো লাগছে, ভীষণ ভালো লাগছে। And due to this pandemic, we are all separated from each other. Otherwise, we would have met physically, and I would have been able to hug Nandini and give a big hug to Suparna, isn't it? We are all separated.
Yes, yes.
And
yes, Suparna. হ্যাঁ, আদের
ও নন্দিনী, আমাদের ডিপার্টমেন্টের সোমশুভ্র মিদ্যা, মানে ও বোধহয় চ্যাট বক্স অ্যাক্সেস করতে পারছে না, ও একটা তোমাকে যা লিখেছে আমি পুরোটাই পড়ে দিচ্ছি, যে থ্যাংক ইউ ফর দিস এনলাইটেনিং লেকচার, you were talking about Sultana's dream. You said that this is primarily about Parda, and although the theme, although utopia is also there, I would really like to know that should we compress the reading of an entire feminist utopia into the context of Parda only?
Yes. My answer is that for too long has Rokea's Sultana's dream been clubbed as a feminist utopia. I have someone this was something that was begun by Bornita Bagchi, and she has an edited volume where she has clubbed Padmarag and Sultana's dream. And Sultana's dream is taught in various American universities in a course as a feminist utopia. And there are other American feminist utopias which are clubbed together. But I believe that you will never understand Sultana's dream if you are only looking at the various scientific achievements that are speculated in the novel, because later also Bayu Jane 50 mile, she does ride an aeroplane and things like that. But what is interesting is the question of Parda, the fact that women can come out. And remember that women's education is dependent on a women coming out. বাড়ি থেকে না বেরোলে লেখাপড়াটা হবে কোথা থেকে? Formal education, schooler education. So that is why this is my rereading of Sultana's dream, which I feel has been locked into a slot. It is time to take it out of that slot and situate it within the greater debates regarding Parda. And Parda is perhaps one of the most cutting edge debates today. When I go to Bardhaman, I see my students wearing something like a half hijab. And this is now a fashion. But remember that it was something that was made popular in the Arab Spring in Egypt, and what is now called the politics of piety. Because European countries were talking about Parda as something bad and demeaning, the women took up Parda as something that was a cultural practice. এটাকে আমি অর্থোপ্র্যাক্সি বলছি। যদি এখনকার সময় এবং এখনকার ডিবেটস অ্যাবাউট পর্দা একেবারে এখনকার সময় বুঝতে চাওয়া যায়, তাহলে সুলতানা's dream must be read again and out of that one socket into which it has been put, which is feminist utopia. It's a utopia, and many of our stories, I mean, for example, পরীর ঢিবি, অনেকগুলো গল্প আছে এই উন্নতির পথে, সব they all use the dream medium, and she says that she's very interested in Gulliver's Travels. So it's more like a satire, you know. And I'm not denying that it is a feminist utopia, but I'm just saying that don't only read it as that. It says far more. It says far more, that it begins in darkness and ends in darkness. ঘুম যখন ভেঙে গেল তখন you are again in the night. ঘুম যখন মানে যখন ঘুমের দেশে ছিলে, then you were in sunlight, you were in the open. Okay, so there is a need to reread these texts again. Whoever, Professor Midda, I'm not denying that it's a feminist utopia. I'm simply saying it's far more than that. Feminist utopia, the first step of a feminist utopia would be to critically address Parda, to be be-Parda. All right, that is utopia. So how can Parda be outside an utopia?
Shubhra, I think you got your answer. So do we have any more questions and comments so that this can continue to be such an interesting discussion? Nandini, do we have Taupati here? So we would really want her to say something.
I don't know. I don't see her. I don't see her. Aparna has given a question. Aparna has gone. She said that this is what she has said. So I will just read it out for you. Just a minute. ও তপতিদি বলেছেন যে খুব ভালো লাগলো নন্দিনী, যদি অডিও কোয়ালিটি আর একটু ভালো থাকতো, একদম নতুন ভাবে রোকেয়াকে দেখা, বিদ্যাসাগরের অনুষঙ্গে অর্থোপ্র্যাক্সির ধারণা, দেওবন্দি চিন্তার সঙ্গে সম্পর্কিত বেহেশতি জেভারের অবতারণা খুব প্রাসঙ্গিক। এই তো ভালো ভালো কথা বলেছেন উনি, সব সব আদরের কথা বলেছেন, বড়রা যেরকম বলে। আর অপর্ণাটা খুঁজে পাচ্ছি না। অপর্ণা, what she has said is that was there a predominant anti-feeling against the Christian governance all around? ঘরে বাইরেতে যেরকম সেই ঢিল মারা হচ্ছে, কেমন কি যেন নাম, মিস টেম্পল নাকি না, যে তোমার ইয়েকে পড়াতেন বিমলাকে, গিলবি, মিস গিলবি, টেম্পলও আছে একটা কোন গল্পের, টেম্পলও আছে, হ্যাঁ গোড়ায় বোধহয় টেম্পল আছেন, যাই হোক এই গিলবি। তো এই যে মানে শুধু মুসলমানদের মধ্যে নয়, অবশ্যই নয়, তবে রোকেয়া যেটা বলছেন যে আমাদের জন্য there is the additional pressure. খ্রিস্টান মিশনারি তো আছেন, খ্রিস্টান মিশনারিরা নানান বাজে কথা বলছেন। আর কে নারায়ণের গল্পের মধ্যে অটোবায়োগ্রাফিতে দেখো যে সেখানে আর কে নারায়ণ মানে স্বামী অ্যান্ড ফ্রেন্ডস যে টিচারের সঙ্গে ঝগড়া করে তার স্কুল থেকে তাড়িয়ে দিয়েছে, তারপর তার বাবা বলেছে বেশ করেছো, কৃষ্ণর বিরুদ্ধে কেন বলেছে সব বাজে বাজে কথা, তুমি দাঁড়িয়ে বলেছো, ভালো করেছো। অল ওভার ইন্ডিয়া ইউল ফাইন্ড, বাট in the case of Rokeya there is the additional pressure of the Bengali Hindu Brahmo woman. Remember, Rokeya is a Bengali. মেয়েরা, বাঙালি মেয়েরা এত এগিয়ে গেছে, আর বাঙালি মুসলমান মেয়েরা ওই মানে উনি অবরোধবাসিনীতে বলছেন যে ওনার এক আন্ট, উনি পর্দা বেপর্দা হবেন না বলে উনি ওই মানে বোরকা পরেছিলেন, ফুল বোরকা, তার আবার চোখও নেই, তারপরে উনি স্টেশনে দুটো কামরার মধ্যে পড়ে গেছেন এবং এতটাই তার মানে পর্দার ভয় যে দুটো ট্রেন তাকে পিষে দিয়ে গেছে, তবু তার আয়া বলছে না না ওনাকে ধরো না, মরদরা ওকে ধরবে না। এইভাবে মানুষ মারা যাচ্ছে, তবুও তারা বেপর্দা হবে না। তো এই যে এক্সট্রিম ফর্ম অফ পর্দা which is taking people away from, so she's saying it's better to have Muslim schools than have people like Naima going over and becoming nurse Nelly, তাই না? তো এইটা হলো অপর্ণার প্রশ্নের আমার উত্তর, যে বাঙালি মেয়েদের যে একটা বৈশিষ্ট্য আজকেও বলে, আজকেও আমি নর্থ ইন্ডিয়ায় বলে যে বাঙালি মেয়েরা খুব স্মার্ট। তো বাঙালি মেয়েরা স্মার্ট কোথা থেকে হলো? আকাশ থেকে পড়লো কি? তো সেই ভদ্রলোককে তো একটু মনে করতে হবে, বিদ্যাসাগরকে, যিনি বাংলা ভাষার আধারটা আমাদের দিয়েছেন, সেই রামমোহনকে যিনি আমাদের বেরোতে শিখিয়েছেন, যিনি সতীদাহ প্রথা বন্ধ করেছেন, কেমন এই যে অক্ষয় কুমার দত্ত। সো the Bengali women had it easier, Bengali Hindu women had it easier. That is a point that I'm trying to make.
Nandini, I think মানে এটা আমার ভুল হতে পারে, but after a certain point maybe they had easy, মানে মধ্যবিত্ত মেয়েদের লেখাপড়া করার দরকার নেই, সে কি একটা যেন ভুলে গেছি, ইতর শ্রেণীর মহিলা মানে মেয়েরা তারা শিখবে কারণ তারা শিক্ষয়িত্রী হবে, তোমার কি দরকার পড়াশোনা করে, এইটা বোধহয় ছিল। তারপরে একটা
ছিল মানে দেশভাগের পর বাঙাল ঘটি একটা ইয়ে হলো যে ঘটি মেয়েরা বেশি পর্দায় থাকবে, বাঙাল মেয়েরা চাকরি করতে বেরোবে, ঋত্বিক ঘটকের ছবি দেখো, বাঙাল মেয়েরা বাইরে বেরোবে। মেয়েদের বাইরে বেরোনো নিয়ে যে অশান্তি, সে তো মহানগর ছবিটা দেখো। তো দ্যাট ইজ দেয়ার, বাট you know, the most of the important battles have been fought by very feminist men, and of which Vidyasagar is preeminent. That is what I would like to say.
থ্যাংক ইউ নন্দিনী দি। আর যদি আর প্রশ্ন যদি আরো না থাকে তো
না, বুলুর the one thing I would like to ask Bulu is, when is your translation of Jyotirmoyi Devi coming out? I would like to read that.
I will
Yes.
give you one copy of it, definitely.
Good. So that will be
এখন আমরা কাজ করছি অবনীন্দ্রনাথের রাজকাহিনী নিয়ে। ওই প্রজেক্টটা শেষ হলে আমরা মানে ইটস এ গ্রুপ, সংযুক্তা দি ইজ she is the president of this committee. আমরা নিউ কলেজ থেকে এই কাজটা করছি। তো আমাদের কলেজের আমি নীলা ধ্রুব আমরা তো আছি, আর তার সাথে আমরা সংগীতা সান্যাল লরিটো কলেজে, ওকে তখন সঙ্গে নিয়ে আমরা এই কাজটা করছি।
খুব ভালো। তো this is a feminist intervention that you are making these texts available in a global language.
Yes, that's what we're trying to do.
With introductions, with annotations. Yes, Suparna, I think now we should go and have our lunch.
Just 2 minutes. Thank you. At a formal close, on behalf of the Department of English and College, আমার তো আন্তরিক কৃতজ্ঞতা। এইরকম একটা সেশন সত্যি এই এমন পরিস্থিতি, তখন মনে হচ্ছিল কিভাবে করব, কিভাবে সবাই নেবে, হঠাৎ করে সবকিছু ছেড়ে আমাদের এই জিনিস নিয়ে আলোচনা। কিন্তু এখন মনে হচ্ছে, বা কাল রাত থেকেই মনে হচ্ছিল, অনেক যুদ্ধর মতন এই যুদ্ধটাকে যুদ্ধ হিসেবে দেখতে পারবো। তো আমি আমার যে শাগনিককে বলবো আমাদের ভ্যালেডিক্টরি অ্যাড্রেস দিতে, তারপরে আমরা সেশন we will bring it to a
yes
close.
And let me thank your principal on your behalf for making this possible. Yes,
of course, ma'am. Shagnik, are
Good
you
afternoon,
there?
everyone. Yes, ma'am, I am there. Am I audible, ma'am?
Absolutely.
Okay, ma'am, I don't know, something is wrong with the camera, so I just using the microphone. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again from the Department of English, Calcutta Girls College. Thank you to our respected speakers, Professor Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya, Department of English, University of Bardhaman, and Srimati Bulu Mukhopadhyay, Madam, Associate Professor, Department of English, New Alipur College. I would further like to thank our respected Principal, Madam, Dr. Shotto Upadhyay. I would also like to thank Dr. Suparna Bhattacharya, without whose guidance such a wonderful session would not have been possible. I would like to thank the audience who joined the seminar. I would also like to thank the entire Calcutta Girls College fraternity. And most importantly, I would like to thank Neha Roy, without whose guidance and the arrangement of this online interaction, this particular session would not have been possible.
Thank you, Shagnik and Nandini Di, Bulu Di. This is an earnest request. এরপরে যদি কোনোদিন মানে কোনোদিন না, খুব শিগগিরই আপনাদের যখন আপনাদের সুবিধা হবে এরকম সেশন যদি করি, আপনি না বলবেন না।
মানে মরার আগে আর কি।
আমরা মরার আগে মরবো না, এই কোভিডে মরবো না। সবাই সবাই ভালো থাকবে। এই টাইমে
Thank you.
So nice to meet you.
Yes,
ভালো
yes.
লাগলো।
আর সুপর্ণা খুব ব্রাইট, তো সুপর্ণার ব্রাইটনেস একটা এমিনেট করে।
নন্দিনী দি, তোমাকে তোমার কাছে গিয়ে অনুরোধ করা, এটা আমার কাছে মানে অনেক ভাবতে হয়েছে যে নন্দিনী দি তো ব্যস্ত, না বলবে, হ্যাঁ না হ্যাঁ না।
নাটা আমি বড় একটা বলি না, বেঁচে থাকলে হ্যাঁই বলবো, এই হচ্ছে কথা। এখন দেওয়ালে একদম পিঠ থেকে গেছে।
না
না, মরে যাওয়ার কথা বলিস না, সাহস নিয়ে বাঁচতে হবে, এই হচ্ছে ব্যাপার। প্রত্যেকেই আমরা খুব ভয়ে ভয়ে আছি। তবে আমি সুপর্ণাকে বলেছিলাম নন্দিনী বললে দারুণ বলবে, এই হচ্ছে কথা, এবং সেটাই দেখা গেল যে নন্দিনী সবসময় দারুণ।
ঠিক আছে, ভালো থেকো। হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ বল, এই বন্ধুদি কি বলেছিল বল।
বলেছিল নন্দিনী দি আগে বলবে এবং ও যাতে হাত দেয় সেটাই সোনা করে দেয়, ও বলবে, সেটা হয়ে গেলে আমি বলবো। দ্যাট ওয়াজ
যাক, এই জন্যই বন্ধু এত প্রিয় আর কি। তারা থাকলে সবসময় দেখো একটা কুশন চারিদিকে, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই, যা খুশি সাপ ব্যাং বলে বেরিয়ে যাও।
নন্দিনী সাপ ব্যাং কখনো বলে না, এভরিথিং ইজ ওয়ার্থ ইট, ও জানিয়ে বলে। অসাধারণ, অসাধারণ।
সুপর্ণা ভালো থেকো।
আমি সাখাওয়াত হোসেন সম্বন্ধে এত কিছু জানতামই না, যদিও সাখাওয়াত মেমোরিয়াল স্কুলটা আমাদের স্কুল কম্পাউন্ডেই ছিল, লর্ডসিনা রোডে যাবার আগে আমাদের কম্পাউন্ডেই ছিল স্কুলটা। তো আমি এত কিছু জানতাম না ওনার সম্বন্ধে। ইট ওয়াজ রিয়েলি ওয়ার্থ ইট, এবার জানা হলো।
হ্যাঁ, আর রূপজালাল আমি পেলে পাঠিয়ে দেবো, কেমন? হ্যাঁ, বেশ, তাহলে উইথ মেনি থ্যাঙ্কস টু এভরিবডি এন্ড ভেরি দ্য এক্সট্রা দ্য চেরি অন দ্য কেক ওয়াজ বুলু, যে বুলুর সঙ্গে একটু আড্ডা হয়ে গেল। আসি তাহলে, মানে আমি সকাল থেকে এবারে ওকে, বাই বাই, থ্যাংক ইউ।